John Bush is the next presenter for the Free Your Mind Conference. John's about to be on a magical mystery tour of sorts. From what I understand, there's going to be a school bus involved, unschooling. What a oxymoron that is to have an unschooled school bus. Pretty darn awesome. If you don't know about unschooling, we'll learn more about it through their journey, their amazing trip to educate people about Bitcoin. They'll be using, from what I understand, nothing but Bitcoin for their journey. They have the family. It's an amazing thing. And John, you also had a TV show at some point. What was that called? Sovereign Living. It blew my frickin' mind. I'm not a big fanboy of things a lot of times, but that kicked ass, John. I got to tell you, I digged it. It was all about being prepared, him setting up his backyard, and then learning about, growing a garden and preparedness, having the chickens down, and shows his family. That was the type of stuff that's right up my alley. That's a reality TV show that I can dig, if you will, because it's reality. John is also an activist who has the intention of not only preaching to the choir, but waking people up, and he has many views on liberty and so on and so forth to do so, and the title of his talk will be Freedom Cells. Without further ado, let's bring John Bush on stage for the Free Your Mind Conference. Thanks, John.
Hey, how is everybody today? Check, check. Can you hear me? Give it up for peace and freedom. How about justice? Enlightenment. Yeah. So my name's John Bush. I'm an activist for peace, truth, justice. It's our new holiday. Celebrated every day. Except for Election Day. I'm an activist, been an activist for about 13 years with the goal of educating people about what I see as the realities taking place in our world, and also the goal of creating a genuinely free society. And when I say a free society, I mean a society absent coercive, hierarchical, monopolistic institutions like the state or any other institution that would oppress people and take away their ability to live their life according to their own destiny, according to their own beliefs, their own views. And in that time, I've had the wonderful opportunity to try several different strategies and tactics in order to accomplish these goals. Some of them have bore zero fruit, some of them have bore some fruit, but still to this day, I haven't achieved my goal of helping to build a free society, but I do feel a lot more free, and I do live my life in a manner that's more consistent with the philosophy of liberty than I did before. Today I'm going to talk about, in large part, I'm going to talk about a strategy that I've been developing, that people have developed before me. I'm just picking up the torch, and it's what I call freedom cells, or a peer-to-peer decentralized mutual aid society that I believe we can build up and ultimately replace the existing mechanisms of state coercive monopoly control, which in my opinion, governments are one of the biggest hindrances for human flourishing and thriving, and they've set us back quite a bit. Who knows what society and culture would be like today if it wasn't for greedy, nasty people taking over these institutions, creating these institutions in the first place, and using them to benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. So I want to share with you my concept of freedom cells and hopefully inspire some people to participate in your own neck of the woods. First, I'd like to share a little bit about my journey, my family, my lovely wife, Catherine Bleish, and our two children, William Lysander and Aliana. We are currently on our third Bitcoin-only road trip across the country. The first time we went from San Marcos, Texas to New Hampshire and back using Bitcoin only. And then we went from San Marcos, Texas to California and back using Bitcoin only. And now we're going from San Marcos to Philadelphia, up to New Hampshire again to pick up a converted school bus. It's a school bus that is a home with showers and bedrooms and a kitchen and all that good stuff. We're going to drive it back using Bitcoin only, and then we're going to live in it back in Central Texas. Raise your hand if you've heard of Bitcoin, digital cryptocurrency. All right. I'll just do a brief intro to Bitcoin. It's a decentralized, peer-to-peer cryptocurrency that isn't backed by any government or bank. When I say cryptocurrency, I use that term cryptography because it uses cryptography and complex math equations and the solving of complex math equations in order to verify the authenticity of transactions that take place on the Bitcoin network. It's a digital commodity, basically. It doesn't exist in physical form. However, they can be stored on physical paper wallets. Most often, they'll be stored on a computer hard drive or on a smartphone that you can use them. But in reality, you don't actually have those Bitcoins. It's digital. It's all stored. It's all kept track of. It's all accounted for on what's known as the blockchain, which is at the heart of the Bitcoin technology. It's a massive public ledger that's kept track of every single Bitcoin transaction from the Genesis block that was created in 2009. The technology comes from a pseudonym, someone that goes by someone, a man, woman, or a group of people. We don't know. It's very mysterious and exciting. Who is called Satoshi Nakamoto. They put out a white paper towards the end of 2008 that described this peer-to-peer digital cash system, and they then started the program, the protocol that runs Bitcoin in 2009. Why it's really exciting is because it's the first time in history that we have a currency that enables people to exchange value with one another across the entire continent without a middleman taking a cut. People refer to it as a trustless system because you don't have to rely on Visa or Wells Fargo in order to ensure that you are not defrauding people or spending currency that you don't have. Now, this blockchain technology goes even further than simply currency. Currency is only the first application. This technology, as I'll speak about a little bit later, can be used for consensus-based voting in a decentralized manner. You don't have to worry about electronic voting machines or trusting your county clerk in order to make sure a vote is valid. There's even a program coming out called Lazuz that uses blockchain technology in order to do a ride-sharing program, much like Uber or Lyft, except there's no central corporation that local governments can lean on and coerce at the behest of the taxi cartel, which maybe it's happened in your area. It happened in Austin. And I'm really excited about the ability that this technology has to free people. I myself am an anarchist. I reject any coercive institutions altogether. Raise your hand if you subscribe to the anarchist philosophy or voluntarism or maybe libertarianism. Does anybody appreciate big government and likes government intruding on anybody's lives? Okay. No Hillary Clinton voters in the room. So I was excited about Bitcoin precisely because of my political philosophy, that of genuine freedom and peaceful trade, mutually beneficial voluntary association instead of being forced to participate in an institution just by virtue of being born in an arbitrary geographic area. I think that's an old and archaic idea, and I'd like for us to move beyond it. So I was excited about Bitcoin because it embodies that. It's anarchy in action. If someone says, oh, anarchy, that won't work. We need governments to keep people safe and to maintain order and to ensure contracts. Well, Bitcoin is proving that millions of people across the globe can participate in a mutually beneficial, voluntary manner without relying on these centralized institutions. But when I actually started using it in exchange and running businesses, I do a radio news service called the Liberty Beat. It's a 5-minute top-of-the-hour news service that plays on the air in Austin. It's also online on Liberty Radio Network. Yeah. And one of the next speakers, Derek Broze, is my lead writer. And he's an agorist. If people aren't familiar with that term, it's a revolutionary market anarchism, a strategy where people, instead of participating within the state, people build institutions to compete with the state and build these market alternatives where we can fulfill our wants and needs together. Yeah, it's a good crowd, easy crowd here. There's my lovely wife and our kiddos back there, Catherine, a.k.a. the Bit Mom. So Derek is an agorist, and he doesn't like to have things on book or on record. He doesn't use a bank account. And I was paying him by wiring him money through Western Union, which is another archaic way to do things, and they take like 7%. You got to physically drive to the local grocery store, and it's a total pain in the neck. So I thought, man, I'm excited about Bitcoin. I like it because of the political implications. Why don't I go ahead and give it a try in my own life? And sure enough, in order to pay him, although I still owe him for the past 2 weeks. Is he in there? Where's he in there? In order to pay him, I simply logged on to my computer, entered the amount, hit send, and immediately the Bitcoins show up in his wallet, and he's able to send those Bitcoins to someone and load them up on a debit card, all sorts of cool stuff, so we can use them practically. Now, my wife and I and our children, we're using Bitcoin only across the country, which means we're flying on Bitcoin using cheapair.com. You can book hotels and flights, cheapair.com. They're one of the sponsors of our trip. You can use gyft.com to use Bitcoin to purchase gift cards. We ate at Chili's in the airport. Terrible experience. Last time we'll ever eat at Chili's. Hey, Bill. How are you? Did you got a rock there? Where'd you get that? Tell us about it. It's getting shy. So you can use gyft.com in order to purchase gift cards from Amazon if you wanted to buy goods and services on Amazon. All sorts of other things that you could do with gift. And maybe Kat will come get Bill so I don't have to gather my thoughts and keep my kids safe. Here's your rock, buddy. Thanks. Okay, so give it up for William Lysander. Bitcoin's great. We're traveling all across the country with it, and I want to encourage people who haven't used it or experimented with it to check it out. It could also potentially be a wonderful investment tool. In 2013, it went up 65 times in value. So if you started with $100 worth of Bitcoin at the end of the year, you would have had $6,500 worth of Bitcoin. But then shortly after, it lost 2/3 of its value. So if you were crafty with it, maybe you sold at the top, or maybe like me, you bought in at the top and then lost 2/3 of your value. But never invest more than you're willing to lose, as the old investing adage goes. So we're traveling the country. We're promoting this idea of Bitcoin. We're also promoting a concept called unschooling, which is pretty new to many people. We're not homeschoolers, we're unschoolers. The differentiation, first of all, I don't want my children to set foot in a public school. Malcolm X once said, only a fool would let his enemies teach his children, and being an anarchist, that's right. I do have compassion for people that reluctantly send their kids to public school because both the parents work and they don't see a way to do it. I would encourage people to explore changing your lifestyle to make that happen, because as a product of government schools, I know that they certainly didn't benefit my life. Besides from, meeting some great friends that I'm still friends with and all that good stuff, it was just a total indoctrination center. But homeschooling, people take their kids out of school and they put them in the home, but oftentimes the parents are just as authoritarian as the teachers. We're also peaceful parents, by the way. We've never laid a hand on our children. We don't use timeouts or rewards and punishments. We reason with them. We use logic. We use persuasion instead of coercion. I have a phrase, let's use compassion and curiosity rather than coercion and condemnation, because in my view, my children are nothing more than a splitting image of myself, and their development has to do with the environment that I put them in and the manner in which I act. So anytime that my child is quote-unquote misbehaving, I don't even like that term, I never say they're acting good or bad, they just are. Instead of scolding them, not to say I've never scolded them, I am imperfect, but instead of giving them a hard time, my wife and I choose to take a deep, hard look in the mirror and see how it is that our behavior is contributing to them. Thank you. So unschooling, essentially, as opposed to homeschooling, there's a rigid curriculum, and parents often are impressing their views or their Weltanschauung, their worldview upon their children. With unschooling, we focus on ascertaining what our children are interested in, and we act as facilitators to ensure that they are able to have rich exposure to that which they're interested in. For example, my daughter just loves dance, and she would dance and watch YouTube videos and dance around and prance around the living room. So we enrolled her in dance, and she's just thriving with it, and she absolutely loves it. So rather than buying textbooks and curriculums, we're paying for her dance class. Actually, my mother's paying for it. God bless her heart. It's hard to be an activist these days. They don't take Bitcoin. No, not yet. So we're just facilitating that. We're buying her videos. We're buying her dance costumes, tap shoes, all that good stuff. My son's really into trains. We go to the train museum in the town south of us, and we learn about it. And every single opportunity we take to learn. You don't have to be in a physical building with a book in front of you to learn. The greatest teacher is experience. So, for example, we flew for the first time on a plane. We were reluctant to take our children because we don't want them to see mom and dad have a pat down. We don't go through scanners. I reluctantly get pat downs because I travel often to speak at conferences and stuff. My wife hasn't traveled in 4 years because the last time she tried to fly a plane was when we were pregnant with our first daughter, and they tried to give her the choice of either going through a scanner or getting a pat down with hands in your pants. So we refused to participate, and we ended up taking a very uncomfortable trade ride home from California. But we try to lead by example, and I certainly wouldn't want my children to think it's normal for strangers to put their hands in your pants, and this is just a normal occurrence for travel. Thankfully, it was very smooth, and going through with the kids actually made it even smoother than going through without the kids, even though we had like 12 bags on our shoulders, and it was a pain in the neck. But I taught my daughter about lift and drag on the plane and the physics of what brings a plane up into the air. So every opportunity we have, we're teaching them about counting and learning, and they just love reading books and all sorts of stuff like that. So if anybody has children or plans on having children, I strongly recommend exploring this philosophy of unschooling, because in my opinion, it gives the children the power to lead their own lives and to further their own interests rather than us simply impressing our views and our worldview upon them. So part of our trip is to educate people about Bitcoin and also to educate people about the philosophy of unschooling, because I genuinely believe, unfortunately, it's maybe a pessimistic view, but history probably proves me right, that this current generation and generations that are adults right now, a lot of people are brainwashed, a lot of people have their heads up their rear end, and I don't have a whole lot of faith that this generation is going to be able to create the world that I desire my children to grow up in. So I'm trying to create an environment whereby my children can experience the freedom that I was never able to experience. And on that note, we don't have social security numbers for either one of them. Our midwife filed a birth certificate, but we didn't sign it, and we reject to grant any authority to it whatsoever. I want my children to have the choice to get a social security number if they choose, or become an American citizen if they choose. And people are like, well, how are they going to open a bank account, John? And I used to say, well, you know, one of these days there's going to be some sort of technology or system that's going to come along that'll enable people to exchange value without needing a social security number. And wouldn't you know it, Bitcoin is here already. I didn't think it would happen that fast. Well, how are they going to have what are they going to do to drive and travel without a driver's license? You need a social security number for that. First of all, I don't think you naturally do, but Kat and I have a good 13 years or so, 12 years to figure something out to create an environment. And when I get into the freedom cells, I'm hoping that there'll be strength in numbers to where people don't have to ask permission to simply travel freely around the land and to engage in business. I think it's objectionable that you have to ask permission to do that. So that's the Uncoinventional Living Tour in a nutshell. We're traveling around the country, spending Bitcoin only, bringing our family along, and educating people about cryptocurrency, decentralized technologies, and the philosophy of unschooling. If you'd like to follow along, you can visit uncoinventional.com, just like unconventional with an I. Pretty clever. My wife came up with that. I usually take credit for all the cool stuff she comes up with, but I'll give her that one. So check that out. That's what we're doing. And one of the things I've been talking about lately is this concept of freedom cells. As I said before, I've had a lot of time as an activist and started off as a 9/11 truther. Raise your hand if you question the official story, what happened that day. That's right. Throughout the 13 years, I learned about it in 2002 watching a conspiracy documentary, 9/11 Road to Tyranny by Alex Jones on cable access in Austin. Alex Jones, love him or hate him. I don't know where I stand on that one, but he certainly influenced me greatly, and I appreciate the work that he does to get the word out about things. I think he's a little angry at times and could be a little more solutions-oriented, but much respect for Alex Jones. He lives in Austin, and I'm in Austin. I was exposed to that at an early age, and I spent a lot of time encouraging people to wake up and question what took place that day. And in that 10 years, there's been so many people that are like, don't talk about 9/11, John. You sound like a kook. You're going to discredit our movement. My movement. And so I've always been a loud and proud 9/11 truther, and I probably will be till the day that I die. Hopefully we'll have some better answers by then. So there's that. Did 9/11 Truth, got involved with the American Civil Liberties Union, started a chapter in college, did a lot of political work. I was a John Kerry supporter at first because I knew that George Bush was bogus and his wars were bogus, and I was bought into the left-right paradigm and thought, man, these Democrats really got something going on. Nancy Pelosi says in 2006, if they get control of the House and Senate, they'll end the wars. Yeah, I believed her. She was a smooth talker. And, of course, they increased and expanded the wars, as they always do. But this was just part of my evolution. I was involved in some local issues, tried to prevent a gay marriage amendment that would prohibit gay couples from marrying in the state of Texas. That, of course, passed with flying colors in Texas, except the county, Travis County, where Austin is, it didn't pass there. And the county that I was campaigning in, Hayes County, it was a close one, but came out in the negative. And then I was exposed to Dr. Ron Paul, who had a massive impact on my philosophical development as an activist. And this is when I was really introduced to the ideals of libertarianism. Throughout college, I had an affinity for the founding fathers of this country, and I had a really great affinity for the U.S. Constitution. Later on, I would come to realize that the U.S. Constitution actually created far less freedom than existed before the Constitution. It was a constitutional coup d'etat that was implemented unconstitutionally in defiance of the Articles of Confederation. It was a total fraud. A bunch of lawyers and big property owners and industrialists that were simply trying to preserve their privilege for themselves. So sure, in 1776, they overthrew the British Crown. Kind of overthrew it. It stuck around, and later we'd have the Federal Reserve Bank and the First Bank of the United States and the Second Bank of the United States. Didn't really go anywhere. So my questioning of even my beliefs that the Founding Fathers were swell guys and the Constitution was great began to expand. And from Ron Paul, I was introduced to Murray Rothbard, who, Murray Rothbard. We named our dog after him, Murray Rothbark. You can see him in our Sovereign Living reality show. And at this point, I started getting deeply involved with local and state political activism and helped to found a political action committee called Texans for Accountable Government, which is still alive and well today, and I think it's about 5-6 years old now. Wait, it's 2015 already. Wow, we started 6 years old, still alive and kicking at the State House, pushing for privacy and eliminating the police state and all sorts of good stuff. But I focused so hard on local and state politics and fighting and fighting and fighting. It was around the same time that I met my wife, who was doing the same thing in Kansas City, Missouri. She founded the Liberty Restoration Project, and they were focusing on local and state politics. And we went head-to-head with the Fusion Center system, it was actually Janet Napolitano in the Department of Homeland Security that brought me and my wife together. So one good thing did come out of this massive Big Brother surveillance state, and 2 other good things came out of it as well. So I always want to show my appreciation to Janet. We went across the country visiting these fusion centers. It's a Big Brother information gathering and intelligence sharing apparatus. We went around the country visiting these and spreading the word about them. I even had a piece of legislation that I authored passed in the State House that would require strict privacy standards. The bill passed. Nobody did anything to hold the fusion centers accountable, so nothing ever came of it. I didn't have the energy and time to do that. We pushed back on the prospect of police officers administering blood withdrawals in the city of Austin, and while police officers weren't allowed to do it, they simply hired phlebotomists and nurses to do it. The point I'm trying to get across is that I spent hours and hours and hours not getting paid, volunteer work, what I thought was doing good and furthering the cause of liberty and creating an environment with less government and more freedom, but at the end of the day, it turned out I was simply banging my head against the wall. Sure, we were changing a few hearts and minds and encouraging people to think differently about the relationship between the individual and government, but at the end of the day, every time I thought what I was doing was taking a step forward, in reality, I was simply preventing larger steps backwards towards more tyranny and less government. And in the time and energy that it took to stop police officers from being trained to do blood withdrawals or to prevent sobriety checkpoints in Texas, call that one step forward a victory, we had gone 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 steps backwards on the local, state, and federal level. So I began to realize, and my wife began to realize at the same time, there's got to be a different way to find freedom. Perhaps if we want to find freedom, we should live our lives in a manner that's more consistent with freedom. That means that we should try at every opportunity not to participate in those institutions which we find unethical, objectionable, or useless, be they the IRS, be they the Federal Reserve System. That's why, again, Bitcoin is so appealing to me, because it gives us the opportunity to exchange value without also empowering an institution that wages wars against innocents and builds massive military and police states, surveillance states at home. We started growing our own food. We figured we want to do away with GMOs. We don't want to have inorganic food with pesticides and all sorts of terrible stuff. So we started growing our own food. We started raising chickens. We want to be consistent with the philosophy of liberty, the non-aggression principle. You shouldn't aggress upon those who don't initiate aggression first, so we don't hit our children because they don't aggress upon us, although sometimes they do. A quick side note, I have about 50 minutes, 55 minutes, so I can go off on tangents. I always like silence myself in my mind when I'm doing speeches, like, shut up, you only got 10 more minutes. You can't go off on tangents. But as I was speaking earlier about reflecting upon yourself and the way that your behavior is demonstrated in your children's behavior, there was a period when our daughter was young when she would hit mama a lot. And she would hit her, and she would yell, and she would be upset. And I imagine many parents would scold their child, put them in timeout, or maybe hit them back, which is hypocritical. If I'm not trying to be judgmental for people's parenting style, I'm just sharing my own experience, but I think it's hypocritical for someone to hit someone to teach them that hitting is bad. It doesn't work. It's like someone being put on death row and being killed to show that killing is wrong. It just doesn't really help things. People are still killing, and children are still acting out. But we took a moment to step back and self-reflect and come to find out that my daughter would do that whenever I was messing with my cell phone and on social media. She was doing it to get attention from her father. So rather than suppress that by coercing or hurting her, I decided to put the damn phone away, and wouldn't you know it, she was no longer hitting her mother. Wow, it's crazy how that works, right? Thank you, it's a good story. So the tangent took me off of where I was at, so let's see if I can recover real quick. Freedom cells. Let's get back to the freedom cells. So my wife and I started changing our lives, changing our lifestyle, and we realized that the politics really was just a drag, a waste of time, a waste of energy. That's not to say that there isn't merit in that. Decriminalization of marijuana, for example, does wonders for liberty. But I think if we truly are to move beyond this coercive, archaic mechanism of tyranny, we need to start exploring alternative institutions. Because if we simply, vote for Rand Paul or Ron Paul, Rand Paul's like Ron Paul light. I still think it's cool that he's running because he's going to educate a lot of people. But if we get Rand Paul in office, it's only a matter of time before he's going to turn into the same tyrant that he's trying to get out of office. And if we ourselves try to inherit this institution, they say power corrupts absolutely. We're just going to continue to perpetuate a cycle whereby we throw the bums out, but we become the bums ourselves because the institution is so powerful. Even to participate in it, you're having to control someone or extort money from someone in order to fund your salary or fund your staff, stuff like that. So, they called it the Ron Paul Revolution. And when you think about the word revolution, the root is revolve. And I started to see that, man, this is just nothing but a series of cycles. We're never advancing towards more freedom. We're simply maintaining a cycle, a status quo of control and despotism. And I want to move beyond that. I think if we do want to create freedom for ourselves or for our children or for future generations, hopefully it's not too far down the line, hopefully it gets there sooner than later, we got to start thinking outside of the box, and we got to try new things. So when I'm finally going to start my speech here, that was the long extended introduction. Freedom cells. Essentially, this is my conception of how we can get from here to there in a practical sense, and hopefully we don't get slaughtered along the way. But if we do, at least we died trying, right? And people will pick up in our footsteps. So a freedom cell essentially is a small group of 8 to 12 people that commit to one another that they will engage in mutual aid and mutual defense. And when I say mutual defense, eventually I mean not only defense against private criminals, but against public criminals as well. There's a big difference between private and public criminals. The difference is with private criminals, if they try to attack you or take your property, you can shoot back, you can defend yourself, and in many instances, you'll be seen as a hero. If you try to do that with public criminals, be they IRS agents, sheriffs, police officers, you yourself will likely be killed or put in a cage as a felon. And unfortunately, largely in part due to public schools, the masses and the public will probably pat them on the back and say, well, by God, thank you for getting that extremist off the street. He was sure shaking things up and making me feel insecure and uncomfortable thanks to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League and all the stuff I see on MSNBC about these sovereign citizens and these extremists. Make no mistake, there's a marginalization effort taking place for people that hold opinions that are different from the mainstream, whether they're political, metaphysical, philosophical, or if you believe this reptilian thing or Nephilim, people are trying to discredit you and kookify you because people don't feel comfortable stepping outside of their little comfort zone. And so I would like us to, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, we should embrace that and step outside the box. It's especially dangerous when it's political and you're trying to go against the status quo and those people that would want to continue to control you and extort money from you. So Let's get back to this group of 8 to 12 people. You start with a core group, which I like to call an inner cadre. Now, this group can serve multiple functions, from mutual defense, as I spoke of, to mutual aid. Let's say that someone is sick and their children need to be watched because you got to go to the hospital or something. Well, you can take your group of 8 to 12, the most trusted, close people, family and friends, and you can call on them for support. Let's say someone's having a hard time and they lose their job and they need $200 extra to pay rent. You go to this group for mutual aid, for mutual support. You help one another. You confide in one another. This is your core inner cadre, the people that help one another. We started this in Central Texas, in Austin. About 2 years ago, we started developing this idea of a small inner cadre group. It failed miserably because of conflict and infighting amongst the 8 to 12. I've often found that it's more difficult to make change with personal relationships and maintain peace with personal relationships sometimes than it is to try to do political battle and stuff, which is a struggle. That's why, again, it's important to self-reflect and to take a deep, hard look in the mirror. We've since reignited this, and now we're spreading this word and trying to encourage more groups to develop. But another thing that these groups can do is set common goals. So the first goal that we had as a group of 8 to 12, I think we had 10 people, 2 families, and a few other single folks that we're really close with, was to set 4 goals. The first of which was every single person in the inner cadre freedom cell should have 4 months of food storage. And we're all going to help each other to accomplish that. We're all going to pitch in and buy at the same time so we can get discounted food products. The second goal was every person in the freedom cell should have firearms, know how to use them safely and proficiently in defense of themselves, their family, their community. The third goal was everyone should have a secure encrypted means of communication off of the grid. This could also be done with CB radios. This could be done with all sorts of non-cell phone technologies, but if you are going to communicate cell phones and through computers, we should do it in an encrypted manner. And the fourth goal is we should all have a bug-out plan. Whether we're all going to the same place as a freedom cell or we're going to separate places, let's all have a plan. So these groups can help towards achieving common goals that can better your life, prepare you for collapse, or just help you to lead a better decentralized, sovereign lifestyle outside of all that. Okay, so that's how it starts. Raise your hand if you could already think of maybe 8 to 12 people that would participate in something like this, right? And if you can't think of 8 to 12 people, look at the guy that just raised his hand. Okay, so that's how it starts. So the second step, once you have your group of 8 to 12 and your inner cadre, you start agitating for the creation of other groups of 8 to 12. Who knows? Maybe you agitate for the creation of 8 to 12 groups of 8 to 12. This is around 100 people now. So you form these similar mutual defense and mutual aid compacts with these other groups. And while you're not as committed to one another as you are with your inner cadre, you're still committed to each other for mutual aid and mutual defense. This idea continues. Now that we have a group of 100, let's start agitating for the creation of 10 groups of 100. And let's all get on the same page with common goals. Let's all get on the same page with mutual aid, mutual defense. Take it a step further, you have 1,000 people now, you have 10,000 people. This can spread out through different geographies. In Central Texas, it's a hotbed for liberty activists and for people that think outside the box and preparedness movements. And so I feel confident that if we push this hard enough, in a matter of 2 to 3 years, it'd be easy for us to have 1,000 people. New Hampshire with the Free State Project has a lot of liberty lovers and people that think outside the box. Obviously here in Philadelphia, in this area, there's tons of people that would participate in something like this. Before you know it, you have 1,000 people here, 10,000 people there, 10,000 people there. We could have 100,000 people. If this many people get on the same page, I think it would be a lot easier for us to all opt out en masse of that which we disagree with. Thank you. April 15th is coming up. Everyone's pretty excited about that. Raise your hand if you're yet to file. You don't have to raise your hand unless you're loud and proud, but raise your hand or just be happy if you don't file at all and you don't plan on it. Yes, that is very encouraging. Give it up for these wonderful, brave folks here. They're leading the way. 10 years, that's right. Drag this man away. I'm sure everybody that does file isn't really filing all the way for truthfully. Okay, so I file. I get 1099s from a few institutions. A couple of them, I have to write my own 1099. It's just so painful to do that. But I feel compelled to do so, not for long, but at this moment I feel compelled to do so. I strongly feel if you have 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, all collectively saying we're no longer going to participate, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, it's going to be a lot easier to opt out because there's strength in numbers, there's strength in unity, and there's strength in truth. And when we have all three of those things on our side, there's no holding us down. I usually end a lot of my speeches with that line right there, so maybe I'll end this one with that. This is just the midpoint. The beauty of it, too, this type of institution, this decentralized peer-to-peer mutual aid society where people have mutual defense and mutual aid compacts, not only can it be a wonderful mechanism to resist the coercive state, but more importantly, it offers us the opportunity to try something new and to build a decentralized free society from the ground up. And for all those people that say, oh, that would never work, just like with currency, we need a government to regulate the currency. We need a Federal Reserve Bank to set interest rates. Does that stuff still fly? It must, because it still exists. We can show people, well, actually, we're well on the way. We have 1,000 people that never once use violence against one another. They don't coerce one another into participating. They all engage in mutually beneficial voluntary interaction, and it works, and it's beautiful. Come with me, I'll show you what it looks like, and you could participate yourself. We can build a mutual aid society from the ground up. And more than resisting tyrannical government, we can help one another. And we can fulfill each other's wants and needs in a peaceful way. And I think the promise of that is absolutely beautiful and wonderful. Back on the resistance front, I mean, the Occupy movement, love them or hate them, I appreciate the passion. I don't like the politics and the economics, for sure, of a lot of the Occupy movement. It was a decentralized and fragmented movement, so different people had different ideas and views. But one thing that really was encouraging and inspiring is whenever they started doing this debt jubilee thing, and people were like, oh, the mortgage that you gave me is based on fraud. Not, these banks create the money out of thin air. I know you have a contract with them that perhaps we should oblige ourselves, but these banks engage in fraud and they do this debt swapping nonsense, blah, blah, blah. The way I see it, most of it's illegitimate. So these people held the same view, and they said, you know what? We're not going to let you evict us. We're not going to let you take our home away. Well, what happens? The bank calls the sheriffs, the local enforcers, and they come and try to coerce someone out of their home. Well, I saw this video on YouTube of literally like 60 Occupy activists forming a human chain around someone's home and saying, you know what? You can try, but we're not going to let you. We're going to peacefully resist. And I don't know what ever came of it. Maybe they came back next week when everyone went home and went back to work. But at least in that moment, the resistance was victory. And this person was not evicted from their home. I have a vision of this panning out just the same. Having 2 children, neither one of them are vaccinated. We don't have socials. For some strange reason, this is weird, and this is out of the ordinary. And unfortunately, we had a home birth for both of our children. That was an amazing experience to help participate in the birthing of my children and to catch my child as they were birthed was absolutely phenomenal. And it really gave me a major appreciation for women and the sacred feminine. I certainly can't do that myself, so I have the utmost respect for how difficult that is. But I do have fear, and fear, in large part, I believe, is why so many people are still participating in this system. Fear is the essence of coercion. You can physically put someone in chains, they'll be a slave, but the way that the government works now is it's more of a thought slavery, where people participate of their own accord because they're worried and they're afraid of what would happen should they not. And that's okay. It's okay to be afraid. And one of the reasons why I think this freedom cell strategy is strong, because the strength in numbers can help to alleviate that fear and allow us and enable us and encourage us to opt out and to live our lives in a manner that's consistent with our principles. Because it pains me to have to file that tax, even though I write off as much as I possibly can. Any dollar that goes to the federal government, a good chunk of it's going to kill people overseas or to build a massive NSA surveillance state. I can't, it doesn't sit well with me. It pains me. And I don't want my children to do that. I don't want them to think that's normal. But what I'm even more afraid of is the prospect of my children being taken away from me by Child Protective Services, which would be completely ludicrous given that we're peaceful parents, our children eat only organic food, unless we're on the road. But that prospect still exists, and it's not a couple days goes by where you don't hear a story about it on social media of a family being taken away because the parents refused to vaccinate them or because they were birthed at home and something went wrong, so they go to the hospital, and the hospital insists on them participating in all these social services institutions. They say no, and the government ends up taking them away. There's a video out of Texas, somewhere near Dallas, Texas, of Child Protective Services come in with like 6 or 7 sheriffs, and the mother, like, doesn't resist at all, but she's vocal about her non-compliance, and a cop ends up punching her in the head like 6 times. This woman didn't do anything to harm her children, so I have a fear of that, and I hope it never happens, but I want to work towards preventing that type of thing from happening from myself or others. We get calls and see it online and through our network of people all across the country and the world, and that stuff happens to them, and I feel so powerless to help them. So I want people to have these networks in place, and I have a vision of someone comes to your door, hey, we're here to do a wellness check. You call your little decentralized communication network. In New Hampshire, they have the Porcupine 411, Pork 411. You call it, and it sends out a message to everyone subscribed on the network. In Austin, we do it too. It's called the Lone Star Liberty Bell. You call them up, you say, hey, this could be for anything. If someone's being hauled away because they were smoking grass and they didn't go to their trial or whatever, or if they're coming to threaten to take the kids away, your people show up, and you form a human chain, and you say, I'm sorry, officers, but we're not going to let you take their children away today. You're going to have to get through us to do so. And I would like for this to take place in a peaceful manner. I mean, if you have 20 people that are willing to physically sit and place themselves in between the road and the officer's police car, it's going to be pretty hard. They're going to have to think twice about the way they do things. I don't advocate violence. I don't support the initiation of violence, but I also don't believe in passive, just allowing ourselves to be killed by evil people. I do think that firearms are a wonderful tool, and I think if the government's going to use firearms to coerce people, perhaps firearms should be used to say no. I don't know, maybe I'm blurring the line here. I'm all for nonviolent resistance, but I don't want to sit there and be shot in the head without putting up some sort of resistance. So this is an exciting talk here. The FBI agents waiting outside the door. So these are the ideas that I have. I'd like to share these ideas with people, and I would like to live in an environment, in a space whereby people have such a strong network and a community and a family that we all are emboldened to live and to embrace our inherent sovereignty and to just say no. So that's essentially the idea of Freedom Cells in a nutshell. We have another 10 minutes or so. We could start a dialogue, a conversation. I'd love to hear your feedback, questions, comments, concerns. If you're participating in a network like this, if you've had an experience like this, does anybody have any questions? Or let's have a little dialogue here. Yes.
One of the things I did as a parent when my son did something that was very hard on me emotionally, he was old enough to understand it, and I said, I don't do that to you, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't do it to me.
Yeah, that's great. She said when her child was old enough to understand he would do something mean or something that would hurt her feelings, she would say, I don't do that to you. I'd appreciate it if you don't do that to me. I think there's mutual respect that parents often don't afford their children. There's a lot of oppressed classes in the world, but I think children are the most oppressed because they're the most defenseless. And to see people abuse their kids or even just lay a hand on their kids, it just pains me. I'd like to see us all stand up for each other and stand up for other people's kids. My wife is brave enough to speak up in public to a stranger that's hitting their kid, and she'll walk over to him, especially when we're with their kids. She'll bring our daughter and say, my daughter's really confused at what you're doing. We don't feel comfortable with what you're doing. We wanted to talk to you about it. And she struck up conversations. Sometimes they go really bad, but sometimes they go well, and you could see the parent kind of being like, well, I didn't know there was another way to do things. And again, I have compassion for anyone that's in this experience. Oftentimes, people that are abusive or hurt their children, they're simply carrying on the same cycle that was inflicted upon them. That's why, again, I think self-reflection is so important. Yeah. What else? Yes.
Any advice you'd give to my 10-year-old son? He's in public school now, but it's an alternative school, but I think do you have any advice on unschooling or where to start with resources?
If you're interested in higher education, A lot of people think that it's hard unless you go to a public school. I have a friend that has a consulting business called Abrome, Abrome. So there's something to look into. But really, I would do some soul searching and find out what it is that you're passionate about and pursue that at all costs. And lean on those that you're close to or those that have resources to help you in your journey. Because I don't think there's any reason why anybody should be stuck in a 9-to-5 that they hate. There's opportunity to provide value to people doing that which you love. So that would be the advice I do. Whatever you're passionate about, no matter how obscure or weird it may be, or there's a way to make money off of it and earn a living from it. You just got to find it out, and you got to believe in yourself. And if you have a mother that believes in you, then you're already halfway there. Yes?
The counterculture of the 60s and the 70s embraced something similar to freedom cells, of course, you know.
Communism.
Yes, communes. Communes, people, thousands and thousands and thousands of young people like yourself wanted to experiment with communal living. And it all blew up, of course, eventually. I mean, there are still some functional communes in this country, and it's wonderful, but most of them just dissolved. Part of the problem was that the people within the communes could not get along with one another. And I think that the whole concept of freedom cells is wonderful. But people have to know how to deal with their own shit within the freedom cells. Otherwise, it's all gonna, it's gonna dissolve, just like our. So
Yes.
you guys have to know how to do it better.
Yes.
And the bottom line is, you know, people have to figure out really workable ways of getting along with one another, so these cells don't, you know, just blow up in your face.
Yes, that's a great point. And our first attempt was a failure, and I like to share that because we learned a lot from it. There's a gentleman named Bob Podolsky who's based out of Arizona, and he has the similar concept. I'd been tossing around this idea of small groups, affinity groups, for a while, and then I visited a few conferences, and that same idea was iterated in a different way. And so I started thinking, like, all right, this is an idea whose time has come. I need to pursue this further. But this gentleman, Bob Podolsky, he is helping to organize what they call the Titania Society, and he calls his freedom cells octologs. And him, along with the gentleman who's since passed named John David Garcia, did immense research in why 8 people is the optimum number of people to have the highest level of creativity and to be the most effective and efficient in furthering your common goal, whether it's building a free society or profiting with a business or political outreach or whatever, or a kid's soccer team. I don't know how many people are on the soccer field, but groups of 8 within that. But they call it an octolog because it's instead of a dialogue, which is communication between 2, they come up with mechanisms and means to communicate within the group of 8. And they spend a lot of time on the consensus building and coming up with those communications and decisions. So in order to avoid that, I think the number one thing we can all do is take a deep, hard look in the mirror and understand that we've all been damaged by culture, society, friends, and in large part our parents, who were damaged by their parents. Just try to do the least amount of damage you can do to your own children to break the cycle. But I think we can all start by taking a deep, hard look in the mirror and loving ourselves, basically. And nonviolent communication. I intend to, next time around, for our group of 8 that we form, for us all to do trainings together with nonviolent communication, which is a means of communication that focuses on empathy rather than trying to shove your view down everyone's throat like I'm doing right now. Yes?
I'm part of Siberian tribe. It's from Altai Mountains, and we have very big land. And I want to invite everyone to be a part of this international project, because when we say it's awesome, it's just what we are suffering, what we needed. So if we make in a like acupuncture points in the planet Earth everywhere, we will be survived, and planet Earth will be survived.
I love it. Tell us the name again of the tribe, the clan.
It's Altai Mountains.
Altai Mountains.
It's Siberian up, and it's very pure. There is no GMO at all, and it's very big land. It's sacred land. They call shamanic, but we all shamans, so just come up with ideas. And the leader of project, her name is Cheynesh Baykushkina. Cheynesh Baykushkina. She's very famous throat singer woman. She's also filmmaker and government, because she's big artist, government, Alpine Mountain government, gave to her big piece of land to make this community.
Great. Yeah, this idea is already taking place all across the world, and it's taken place all throughout history. Tribes, clans. Of course, there's some tribes and clans that are like warlords and stuff like that, but there's also others throughout history that have operated peacefully for mutual benefit. It's a very, very beautiful thing. Yes.
I'd like Kirby to explain it, but maybe someone would, is familiar with it. Are you familiar with Transition Town?
Yes, Transition Town. They're alive and well in Austin, Texas, and from my understanding, it's this concept that we need to be more resilient in our use of resources, and they especially want to get away from fossil fuels, so they're taking local areas, communities, and they're doing everything they can to live in a more sustainable manner. Very similar. I'm not sure if I share the same political views, but I certainly believe that living our lives in a sustainable manner that's more consistent with nature and that isn't harming, we're not taking out that which we're not putting back in, I think it's extremely important. That's a similar movement.
That's the one, this is the one that started in Australia, and I forget the man's name. And one of the people that studied Transition Town in Australia, he's from Colorado, and he's the American chapter. And he has formed maybe 10 towns across the country, and the biggest one was in Colorado until they decided to have the most successful one, which is right here in Bethlehem, Northampton Township in Bethlehem. And they've been around for quite a while, and last I heard, they started one in Springfield Township, right here near Philadelphia. And they're kind of low key, but they have like an agriculture division, a steering committee, and they have like a whole book on the person that founded it, but the biggest one is in Bethlehem. And, they go along, they even have like a little government, which is like a really non-government, but it's just 5 people in council, anybody can show up. And they actually have the book of Thomas Paine, and they go by Thomas Paine's teachings. And one of the biggest influences would be something very simple, and it's just encouraging local businesses and supporting your local business so that people thrive in the community, and having a catalog of all everybody's businesses so that we all prosper and that they don't get infiltrated with franchises and corporations.
Cool. Transition towns. Thomas Paine is the man. It's a struggle. That which we obtain too lightly, we esteem. That which we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly, right? The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph, which, it's been hard, so I'm looking forward to that triumph. Let's get a question in the back, and maybe we'll take this one and one more real quick.
Yeah, I wanted to inquire about the Bitcoin. It seems like usually things that are utilized digitally or so-called encrypted, things like this, maybe they had an empirical source, or maybe would be easily tracked or held or dealt with by them in that fashion, being electronic. Like we were saying, we're going to go for a freedom block, we're going to go to more analog almost, right? Try to communicate with you through my CV, or,
Well, yeah, I like inside outside. I appreciate people doing politics, but I'm an anarchist, and I like digital analog. I have a smartphone. Sometimes it feels like it's a ball and chain, but I think that we can get the best of both worlds. We can be naturalists. We can use old school ways of doing things, but I think we should embrace that technology which can benefit us the most. And I think Bitcoin.
Do you think the Bitcoin truly sourced from private sector or something?
I mean, for all I know, it could be a NSA, CIA, deep-level conspiracy that. But I always judge things by their fruits. So if the government or if some shadowy figure is using Bitcoin to try to do harm, I don't see it happening. I see it empowering people, giving women in third world countries access to banking, enabling people to transfer money back and forth to one another from the Western world to, I don't even like using third world term. I think it's like a trap, but I think it's not doing anything to hurt the cause of liberty. It's helping immensely. So I love it. All right, one more question. Who's it going to be? How do we choose? How do we choose? You.
Oh, I was going to ask if you're familiar with Stefan Molyneux, like radio.
I'm familiar with Stefan Molyneux, and I've learned a lot from him, and I certainly appreciate his views on peaceful parenting. Sometimes he can be a bit of a chauvinist, in my opinion, so I like him. He's a good guy. Stefan Molyneux, you can check him out at freedomainradio.com. He's got a lot of excellent podcasts. He's a wonderful philosopher. Okay, one more quick one. Yes?
Yeah, just to be a connection between these freedom cells and enthusiasm for all these music and arts festivals that are happening around the country, around the world, like Burning Man, all the recreationals. Oh, yeah, sure. Like
Yeah, like Burning Man is an example of a decentralized, peer-to-peer, voluntary society that comes together regularly. And I imagine most of the, I've never been. Somebody wants to invite me, I'll go. I imagine many people, the networks that are built there go back home with them, and it's decentralized. Not everyone lives in the same geographic area. I think it's a wonderful example of how communities don't necessarily have to be geographically connected. They can be expand beyond that through digital communication, all sorts of technologies. But yeah, I love conferences and music festivals, and when they come together voluntarily and peacefully, it's another living example of how anarchism works, living anarchism. All right, folks, my name is John Bush. You can follow our Bitcoin tour at uncoinventional.com. Thank you very much.